The disorganization of Zizek's thoughts as a special inquiry into, just recently conducted into his basic philosophical presupposition shows, lead Zizek to a false view of the position of the sciences in the overall view of life. So Zizek places the sciences uh, in such a way that they have their axis mundi, or center, in physics, in fundamental physics. And as he gets older, he becomes more and more in a fugue state concerning this whole issue of whether he's understood what he's all along treated as the anchoring point, or as the one point from which leverage can be got, which is the core of the physics, because he, as a materialist, regards whatever is happening from the point of view of physics as the first step, and then the claim that there's all kinds of machinations through some Freudian theory that lead one to the human being, or that one could take it from the point of view of German idealism, and as in his oft-cited the spirit is a villain, and then tried to show through the Hegelian demonstrations that even though in some way Hegel wants to say that a stone, a tree, a pine tree could be shown to be as much Geist as it is Realitat, or heaviness, or gravity. The famous two things that are being totally drawn together as the spirit of gravity and the spirit of freedom, which would be then weightlessness, as Nietzsche makes much hay out of much later on. But something beginning in fundamental physics then leads to the human being, and then there's somehow some complications there. Otherwise, materialism for Zizek means simply that nobody's in charge. These fundamental bases are so radically vague that they could explode in all kinds of directions, but then we could only take our course of direction by inferring a sense out of Zizek's own comportment. We look at Zizek, this is how he's thinking about it, and then we infer this is how we should understand it theoretically. Because otherwise, just from the basis he gives for his materialism, he could do anything. But so he's been looking a lot at physics, but he overlooks that philosophy conceived of as death rather than life is already the primary basis from which we have to conceive of anything called knowledge or science. So let me explicate that. If I have before me a model, now allow model not only to mean the model of fundamental physics as presented by Richard Feynman, as a modification of the Schrödinger version of things. But model in its vernacular sense. So, for instance, so when I was a kid, we used to have lead figures. And then a friend of mine, Andrew McPhail, who later became an artist on The Simpsons, the born artist, used to paint them So those are models, and there's little figures of guys with swords and pikes and stuff like that, connected to Dungeons and Dragons. So, um, yeah, when we were very young, like 12, 13 years old, we had these things. Um, and this is something you could hold up and you can look at it, and then you could say, um, is it painted good? Should we change? I mean, would it be better if instead of green we had red there? Look at that pike. Should the pike be at a different angle? But you could hold it up and look at it. That's what a model is like. A model is something you have at your disposal as an object. And so philosophy thinks of everything as something it has at its disposal as an object. This is the objection Heidegger's making. Philosophy as predication is something said about that object. One could say that there's some complications in the case of Hegel there about the mere predication of time, and that there's some kind of dialectic there still. But then there's all discussion. But Heidegger has the answer to that, and he thinks about it. This merely ontic philosophy, as in Hegel, as against the way he conceives of being as not in this kind of possible dialectic. But basically, the point is, what Zizek doesn't seem to be sufficiently conscious of when he's thinking about sciences is whether the science is about the model or whether it's about the object of the so-called model. If the model, again, thinking of a statue or something, dogs actually bark at statues. There's a statue of a saber-toothed tiger, an extinct animal, and I've seen dogs go bark at them. So this is kind of the idea of art, or the artificial, in the sense of the 4th century contest of Zeuxis and Parrhasius, or Zeux, this famous notion of Zeuxis has fooled the birds into thinking his painting has grapes, but Parrhasius has fooled Zeuxis, so he's fooled a human being into thinking that there's a curtain over this painting, when actually the curtain is a thing painted. So this idea of science and art as verisimilitude, or as being as like the thing itself. Zizek doesn't really confront the problem of whether this split between the so-called Einstellung or attitude of the how is it? I forget. But the attitude, the so-called attitude of natural attitude and theoretical attitude. It's as though we already posited something that had the real thing, and then against it the theoretical attitude, which is throwing up this so-called model. Without seeing the radicalness of which the model moves with the supposed pre-state of the natural attitude, how does Zizek, he always has a presupposition about something that he's unclear about materialism, and it's like a zealous, hot faith in contradistinction to holding back and looking at it in the model.